So let's start with the burial aspect. This might look very obvious, like what's there to discuss in burial? Isn't it that very simple? Why do we have to discuss so many things about burial? Actually, there is a lot of things people don't know about burial, and we'll inshallah cover some of them. Like we'll talk about issues such as different kinds of grave, how to bury, and what are the common mistakes that people make while burying. And sometimes people have a lot of the shirk and bid'ah associated with the grave, and people have a lot of questions when it comes to visiting the graves. Can women visit or not? What scholars said about it? If they had different opinions, what are they? And what's the strongest? And we also cover, inshallah, what happens when a person goes inside the grave, like what questions the angels will ask, and a good person, how will he feel inside it, and what will be the punishments in the grave for a bad person, and so on. So there are a lot of things, but important thing that we have to remember about this burial is that it's a ritual, it's an action of worship, and just like any other thing we do for Allah, when we say worship, there's always do's and don'ts associated with it. We have to learn what Allah expects from us, what He wants and what He doesn't want. And whenever we talk about anything related to worship, especially when it comes to burial, we have always, as usual, Quran and Sunnah to refer to. But sometimes what happens is that there are few things which are not found in Quran and Sunnah, but it becomes like a common practice. And so if something is a common practice since the time of Sahaba, that becomes a fiqh ruling, a fiqh law. For example, like even in burial, we will see that not everything Prophet Muhammad said directly, like verbally. He did it, and Sahaba followed it, and then they narrated that we used to bury like that, so that's why we are continuing this way. So that became a law. So we'll cover some of them. What is hadith and which ones are covered from hadith and which weren't. And as we said, one of the things, the last thing among the 5 things is for the kifaya, is the burial part. But important thing to notice here is that there is one difference. I put here non-Muslims burial, Muslim and non-Muslims burial. All the 4 previous steps that I mentioned, that only applies to Muslim. But the scholar said that this part, burial part, it applies to non-Muslims as well. And it's obvious reasons, because it's of course we have evidences from Quran and Sunnah, but apart from that, it's a basic human value, and apart from that, we also have this issue of public welfare, and diseases might spread if the humans are not buried properly, and it's also a respect for human being as well, regardless of his religion. So what's the evidence? Why do we say that? How do we say a non-Muslim has to be buried? So, for example, in the Battle of Badr, right, when many Muslims became shaheed, and there were also many non-Muslims died. Both, yeah. So, what happened in that Battle of Badr? When non-Muslims died, they took all the dead bodies of the non-Muslims, and they buried it in a big grave. They just dumped them and they covered it up. So that's the evidence that the scholars give. And also, the other evidence that scholars give is when the uncle of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he died, what was his name? Abu Talib. Actually, Abu Talib, when he died, he told Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu to go and bury your father. He commanded him to go and bury his father. So that's why, and the scholars say that if non-Muslims themselves are taking care of burying a non-Muslim, then you don't have to worry. But if it's your close relative, or other non-Muslims are not burying, then you have to step up. Otherwise, you will be responsible in front of Allah for not burying it. Burial places. So where do we bury the dead? The very common place, and the actually the only allowed option, generally speaking, is the graveyard. That's where we bury all our dead. But when we say a graveyard, we have to remember that Muslims should bury only in Muslims' graveyard. They should not go in non-Muslims' graveyard unless the situation is, like country. There's restriction from the government, or if the Muslims themselves didn't purchase any land, you don't have an option. But preferably, Muslims should try to get their own graveyard and bury their dead in the graveyards. And it also applies for disbelievers, non-Muslims as well. They should have their graveyard. You cannot move their burial into Muslims. It should be separate. And this applies even to children if they were disbelievers, the parents. And or at least, if that is not possible, try to get a section of the graveyard specifically for Muslims. But preferably, community should get together and we should purchase our own graveyard. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu at the time that Sahaba used to be buried in one particular graveyard. What is it? In Medina. Baqi. Baqi. That's the place where everybody used to be buried, most of them, in Medina. And still, it's actually almost attached now to the Masjid al-Nabawi, a little bit distance. But whenever people go to Medina, they visit this place as well. So apart from that, there are some exceptions. And in those exceptions, they can be buried in some other locations. Second one being battlefield. So if this becomes the preferred place, and when a person becomes shaheed, he is supposed to be buried right there. You cannot bring them back to a graveyard. For example, during the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, if people used to die, they obviously take them to the Jannat al-Baqi. But at the time of Battle of Uhud, that's what happened. When many Sahaba died, they were trying to move their body to this graveyard. But Prophet Muhammad ﷺ commanded that bring the bodies back. They should be buried here in the battlefield where they became shaheed. So that's reported in Abu Dawud, Hadith Sahih. And also, this one is a specific case, location. So if a person died at a particular spot, you bury him at the very same place. Don't move him anywhere. And this applies only to prophets. And that's the hadith from Tirmidhi again. Never did Allah take a prophet's life except in the location where he should be buried. It's said by Sayyidina Abu Bakr. So that applies to all the prophets and also to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this doesn't apply to us. We can't say, hey, I want to practice the sunnah. So there again, sunnah is, we have to discuss a lot of things. Everything is not a sunnah. There were a few things which were very particular to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We cannot practice this. This is not a sunnah for us.